was born in El Paso, Texas in 1916. I had two brothers and one sister, and of course my mother. She taught me something that has been a part of my philosophy of life, and that is when I was young and going to school, I came home one time and talked about the teacher setting me aside, sitting me in the back of the class in the last row, and not paying too much attention to me, and so on. What she said was, "You are no better than anyone else, but no one else is better than you are. You are as good as anybody else, but you are not better than anybody else." And that has been my philosophy through life.
Born to an Hispanic father and a Filipino mother, Rudolph Davila enlisted in the Army in 1939 when employment opportunities were scarce. He was training recruits for jungle fighting by the time the war was in full swing and expected to be assigned to the Pacific Theater. But because of his Asian heritage, he found himself headed for the Anzio beachhead instead.
We broke out of Anzio when the first town was Cisterna del Torre. We went through that town and we dug them out of cellars, second-story floors, and we just blasted the heck out of the machine guns and rifle fire. And then on the way up to Rome, about halfway up to Rome, that's where I was in support of a rifle company. They were ahead of me climbing this hill, and I was behind them. The idea was that if they ran into trouble, I would bring up 4 of my machine guns and clear the way for them. At the bottom of the hill was a road. Parallel to the road was a railroad track. And beyond the railroad track were some German machine guns. I don't know how many German machine guns. I didn't know about them until I got to the crest of the hill. As I got to the crest of the hill, they opened fire. And this hill was just covered with grass, tall grass. So there was no cover for the rifle company that was lying there on the forward slope. I got down on the ground really fast. And then I yelled for my guns. They were behind me and they were on the backward slope of the hill. And I yelled back, I said, "Bring up a gun." And the gunners would not respond because they could see the bullets coming, just skimming the grass, or just barely missing me. And so I said, "Well, pass up the tripod." Now this happened in seconds. Pass up the tripod. So they passed up the tripod and pass up the barrel. Pass up the barrel. I assembled the machine gun, and I had my hand on the trigger already. So by the time that I got up on my knees, the gun was already fired. And I swept up and down the tracks, and I had another chest of ammunition brought up, inserted that one in. This is all done in seconds. It's not done in minutes. I fired 3 chests of ammunition at the area where I had seen those men, and pretty soon the machine guns quieted down.
After eliminating 2 key enemy positions, Davila sprinted to a nearby tank, where despite a hail of enemy fire, he engaged and routed a 3rd enemy group before turning his attention to an enemy-held house nearby.
I got off the tank, then I scooted along as fast as I could with my hands and knees until I got to the bottom of the house. And I spotted 2 rifle barrels shooting from a window. So I took 1 grenade and I pulled a pin and I threw it into the building. And I ran around the house where the door was. And there was a stairway going straight up from where the door is. And there was a shell hole from a tank that fired into the house. And the kid said that I climbed the shell hole, but I don't remember climbing it. I just remember shooting through that shell hole, because I saw the Germans running away from the machine gun positions. So with the rifle that I borrowed, I began to fire on them until I couldn't see them anymore. And that was the end of that episode. Now at that point, the Congressional Medal of Honor didn't have much meaning to me. The only time that I thought I was going to get something was when I got a call from the front lines to go to the rear. They put me on a Jeep and they drove me to a hospital at Besançon. And when I got there, they assembled all of the personnel from the hospital. And General Michael Daniels was there, and he made a speech. And then he asked if someone had an extra second lieutenant's bar. No one had an extra lieutenant's bar, so he told one of the nurses, go in there and give me a piece of tape and a pair of scissors. So she went in and got a piece of tape, a pair of scissors, and he himself cut 2 little pieces of tape the size of a bar, and he stuck one piece on my collar and the other piece on my helmet. And then he says, "No, you are an officer and a gentleman." And all the time I was thinking that he was going to give me a medal, and instead he made me a second lieutenant, which was all right. I like that.
Although his action earned Davila the Distinguished Service Cross, it was not until 50 years later that the valiant actions of Asian American servicemen would be re-examined by the U.S. government.
My wife had been sure that someday I would receive the Congressional Honor. She was very positive. Someday they're going to recognize what you did. And at that moment, my first thoughts were of her. My dear wife is not here. She would have been elated, and I would have been elated with her. I'm very grateful for the nation that has honored me that way. And I hold no resentment against the fact that it took them this long. I think that each soldier views this type of thing from a different point of view. When I went into the service, I was who I was as a civilian. And for a long time, I was still a civilian in uniform. But when I saw the war and I was surrounded by killing, then I became a different person. I became a soldier. We were fighting then for the freedom of the world. Even though I was young at that time, I knew that if Hitler conquered the whole world, we would lose our freedom. And even though the words patriotism and loyalty and dedication and respect and all these words had not been part of the vocabulary in our high schools, yet it was something that I felt within me. And so that was my motivation.